time. We'll now have the Pledge of Allegiance led by Representative Moore from Alabama. Thank you, Mr. Moore. We welcome everyone to today's hearing on organized retail crime and threats to public safety. Without objection, the gentleman from California, Mr. Swah, will be permitted to participate in today's hearing. And I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. I'm pleased to be here at the subcommittee hearing. I'm grateful to all the witnesses for being here. The topic before us today is a hearing titled "The Rise in Organized Retail Crime and the Threat to Public Safety." Organized retail crime is a growing threat to our retailers and their employees, our law enforcement, and our communities. The fact that we are having this hearing in some ways is very disappointing. We used to be a country that adhered to the rule of law. We used to be a country of sharing a sense of trust and respect for our fellow Americans, and that trust and respect in many respects seems to be gone. And so too is the rule of law. And when the rule of law is gone, it threatens our very freedom. 3 years ago, during the Summer of Love, our country burned and our stores were looted. Consequences seemed to have been few. Organized retail crime has become a growing problem over these past 3 years because criminals see the opportunity for profit and know they can get away with it. Lululemon, I'm not even sure how you say that.
Lululemon.
Yeah, Lululemon, yeah.
You nailed it.
And I actually think I had a relative who worked for Lululemon. But anyway, nonetheless, Lululemon CEO Calvin McDonald stood by the retailer's recent decision to fire 2 employees who tried to intervene during a theft at one of its stores. California is in the process of passing laws prohibiting retail employers from training employees to actually intervene in shoplifting and active shooters. That's their SB 553. We are coddling criminals and fanning the flames of this problem, and it's open season on our stores, and criminal syndicates are taking advantage. The National Retail Federation found that 8 in 10 retailers said the violence and aggression associated with organized retail crime incidents increased in the past year. Organized retail crime can happen in as little time as just 2 minutes. A CVS executive recently testified that organized retail crime events are reported in a CVS pharmacy store every 3 minutes. In just 2 minutes, the average professional thief targeting CVS steals $2,000 worth of goods. 2 minutes, $2,000 worth of goods. These are not cases of simple shoplifting. The Biden administration and rogue Democrat prosecutors have eroded law and order in this country, creating an environment where retail workers are terrified to go to work. The rise in organized retail crime is causing businesses to close and endangers the public. Walmart, for example, is losing $3 billion per year in U.S. revenue due to theft and is considering closing stores and increasing prices due to the severity of theft across the country. Who pays the price? Well, consumers do. Consumers are paying to cover the losses by retailers. And with Biden's historic inflation, that becomes an extra challenge, particularly for those who are poor. Let's hear how retail CEOs and others in the retail industry state the problem. Bob Nardelli, the former Home Depot CEO, stated, "Today, this thing is an epidemic. It's spreading faster than COVID. The degree of severity now is not just theft, it's smash and grab. Our associates are afraid. The retail salespeople are afraid. Consumers are afraid. We've got to get control of this. And if the administration doesn't get control of this, they're abdicating it to the businesses, both public and private." Bob Eddy, BJ's CEO, stated, "Organized retail crime is definitely a thing. We see it, and it is material. It is a much more pointed problem in certain places, particularly on the West Coast or places like Chicago or Albuquerque that have blue state or local blue governments that don't really feel like prosecuting crime." We have a poster behind me. Ira Kress, president of Giant Food, has posted this particular message in his supermarkets. You may, quote, "You may notice changes to your checkout experience as you are shopping with us today. Due to a significant increase in crime and theft that we and many other retailers are experiencing across our market area, we have made several changes to our operating procedures to mitigate the impact of theft to our business. We know that these changes may cause some inconvenience or be disruptive to the experience you're used to, and I assure you we are making these changes out of necessity to prioritize the safety of our associates and customers, close quote. He has further said, to say that theft has risen tenfold in the last 5 years would not be an understatement. It has increased exponentially. The last thing I want to do is close stores, but I've got to be able to run them safely and profitably. And that's exactly what's happening. These retailers are closing stores, costing our communities jobs, and reducing Americans' access to basic commodities. Retailers are forced to raise their costs or close stores. And that's particularly true in communities that can least afford higher price of goods or scarcity of opportunity to get those goods. It is the law-abiding Americans who pay the price, not the criminals. Walmart decided to shut down 17 of its stores after CEO Doug McMillon warned that theft was the highest it's ever been around the country, including closing half of its Chicago stores, where thefts are up 25%, according to the Chicago Police Department, while robberies are up 11%. Walmart has also permanently closed stores due to retail theft in South Bend, Indiana, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Honolulu, Hawaii, Albuquerque, New Mexico, Washington, D.C., and Atlanta, Georgia. Target has seen $400 million in lost profits in 2022 due to organized gangs of shoplifters, and has permanently closed stores in College Park, Maryland, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Walgreens has closed 5 locations in crime-ridden San Francisco and others in Chicago, Houston, and Orlando. Macy's has a 3-year plan to close 125 stores, citing increases in retail crime, which has resulted in drops in profits. Best Buy is closing 20 stores a year for the same reason. Bed Bath & Beyond has identified 416 of its 1,500 stores for closure. Unfortunately, some retailers and prosecutors are more interested in protecting criminals than they are protecting their own employees. It is clear that some prosecutors and bail reform laws in Democrat-run cities and states are emboldening criminals and fueling a rise in organized retail crime. We've even heard it from our own witnesses during the violent crime field hearing we had in Manhattan earlier this year. Democrat City Councilman Robert Holden provided a grim description of everyday life in Manhattan when he said, mentally ill, homeless people verbally and physically attack people randomly on the streets and in the subway. Pharmacies lock up their products. The police officers also feel pressured to undercharge perps they arrest. This is a daily reality in New York, close quote. Criminals know they can avoid prosecution and incarceration if they stay below the felony threshold. In jurisdictions with rogue prosecutors who do not prosecute misdemeanor theft, criminals can steal just below the threshold and avoid prosecution altogether. This has been a problem in California, especially, where many jurisdictions have rogue prosecutors. In 2014, voters in California passed a law which raised the felony threshold for theft from $400 to $950 in the state. Lowering felony thresholds would not be needed if prosecutors actually prosecuted misdemeanors, and lax bail reform laws did not let criminals go free. Broken window policing does work. Instead, we are seeing lax and, in some cases, non-existent prosecution grow a new generation of criminals. The rise in organized retail crime in California comes as the California legislature is advancing a bill that would prevent retail staff from even stopping thieves from stealing inside stores. The legislation has passed the state Senate and is pending in the state assembly. California Retailers Association panned the legislation as an invitation for criminals to come in and steal. Not weeks after the tragic death of Blake Mose did the California State Senate pass this disgraceful legislation. Employees cannot intervene in crimes, and criminals can steal up to $900 in goods with impunity. So why would you open a store in California? Well, you wouldn't. That's why so many retailers have left these Democrat-run cities. Thankfully, some states are actually stepping up to the plate to combat these violent criminal enterprises. The state of Kansas signed into law Senate Bill 174. Among other provisions, the law authorizes the Kansas Attorney General's office to be the primary prosecutor in the state for crimes, such as ORC, that occur in 2 or more counties. More than 30 states have actually passed anti-ORC laws. And while I assert that this is largely a state and local issue, it is important for us to understand that these ORC cartels are crossing state lines. Federal laws that can be used in prosecution of these include 18 U.S.C. 2314, interstate transport of stolen property, 18 U.S.C. 96 RICO, and 18 U.S.C. 1956. I'm glad we have states that understand the growing threat of organized retail crime in their communities, and we're willing to hold these criminals accountable, and are willing to hold these criminals accountable. It's time we fight back against organized retail crime. It has to be stopped. Criminals must be penalized, and prosecutors need to be held responsible for failing to protect their communities from this violent crime. We must restore law and order to our communities and make America safe again. And I'm going to submit 2 letters for the record. From one from the National Retail Federation, dated June 13th, 2023, talking about the rise in organized retail crime, and then also CHEP, which is a CHEP USA, in response to our notice of this hearing, and they'll be admitted without objection. So ordered. And our ranking member is not here. We'll save time for her to speak when she gets in, and I don't see either the ranker or the chair of the full committee, so we'll go. I'm just going to go ahead and introduce the guest and then give you 5. Or do you want your 5? I don't. I'm going to recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell. Mr. Swalwell.